America's long battle to increase the minimum wage for workers. The current federal minimum wage, which stands at $7.25 per hour, has not been raised by the US Congress since 2009, despite the majority of Americans supporting higher wages. US President Joe Biden has signed an executive order that will require government agencies to pay $15 an hour to all contractors starting January 2022. This move comes as Biden continues to press the US Congress to pass federal legislation for higher minimum wages across the country. The US president had attempted to insert $15 per hour minimum wage in his $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief bill, but the Senate blocked the effort, saying it did not qualify under the special budget rules. The current federal minimum wage, which stands at $7.25 per hour, has not been raised by the US Congress since 2009, despite the majority of Americans supporting higher wages. A survey conducted by Pew Research Center in 2019 concluded that 67% of two-thirds of the American population favor raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour. Though some US states have raised the minimum wage, through state legislation, the fight to increase the federal minimum wage is its own set of political and economic challenges. What are the political challenges to raising the minimum wages? US economic policy is dependent more on political power than on economic sensibilities. Democrats have been in favor of raising the minimum wage. In 2013, the President Barack Obama called for an increase in the wage to $9 per hour. The same year, Democrats introduced a bill to increase the wage to $10 per hour, but the proposed legislation was not passed. Republicans have been generally opposed to increasing the minimum wage and have continued to block efforts by Democrats to do so. During the final years of the Obama presidency, with Republicans controlling both houses of the Congress, the Democrat Party in the 2016 Democratic National Convention stated that the target of increasing the minimum wage to $15 per hour. Gene Wickens, a political economic researcher at the University of Massachusetts, has quoted under the dome to describe the lobbying efforts of organizations such as National Federation of Independent Businesses, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and the National Restaurant Association opposing minimum wage provisions. More than three-quarters of this organization's political contributions go to Republicans. This financial pull is reflected in partisan voting. In 2019, when the House voted to raise the Wage Act of 2019, 97% of the Democrats voted in favor of the act, while 98% of the Republicans voted against it. Janet Wickes-Lim has hinted that lack of union membership explains the dry spells without rise in wages. Unions in the past have been fundamental in ensuring a strong bargaining power for better wages, working conditions, and benefits. So what is the opinion of voters on this issue? The demand for higher minimum wage is extremely popular among voters from both parties. But this popularity hasn't been able to yield results due to extreme partisanship among legislators. Since 2013, the United States have been widespread protest for increasing the minimum wages, which has led to 29 states and DC paying higher wages than the federal minimum. In 2014, when people in Republican-controlled states of Alaska, Arkansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota voted in favor of increasing the minimum wage, it was clear evidence that the idea had support across party lines. One agenda that brought the Democrats and Biden to power in 2020 election is the $15 minimum wage. Many people are disappointed and had expressed their outrage after the motion failed in the Senate when the COVID-19 relief bill was passed. What are the arguments for a higher minimum wage? Minimum wage is meant to be a living wage. However, even though the cost of living has gone up over the years, wages have been stagnated, resulting in millions of minimum wage workers being unable to afford to pay rent and meet expenses. Many of them live below the poverty line. Around 13% of American workers make minimum wage, and one half of these workers provide essential services. CBS News has reported that as of October 2020, 1 out of 4 Americans is unemployed or living on poverty level wages. According to progressive think tank Economic Policy Institute, gradually raising the federal minimum wage to $15 by 2025 will increase pay for 32 million workers, lifting millions out of poverty. Higher wages would stimulate the economy and business growth as people will spend more. The Atlantic report that the low minimum wages cost taxpayers $100 billion a year as the government is forced to spend more on Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program, cash welfare, food stamps, and other welfare services. A Brookings Institute research concluded that $15 minimum wage would help 14 million struggling families achieve self-sufficiency. At present, only 0.1% of minimum wage earners can afford a bedroom apartment in the US. Higher wages would also help reduce racial and gender wage gaps, as statistics have shown. POC and women are being significantly underpaid than their white colleagues and also face more exploitation in the workplace. So, what are the arguments against raising minimum wage? Raising the minimum wage could lead to a loss of about 1.4 million jobs, particularly for teens, young adults, and less educated workers, as company will shift to automation and prioritizing higher skilled workers. Cato, a libertarian think tank, argues that the pandemic has reduced profits for businesses and also the demand for workers. Therefore, since businesses are looking to recover from the crisis by opening up, now would be time to increase the minimum wages, as that would lead to inflated costs. A high minimum wage will disproportionately impact small businesses. Since they don't generate enough revenue to afford a high minimum wage, this could lead to them cutting costs and even shutting down. Moreover, large American businesses like Target, Amazon, and Costco had earlier lobbied against minimum wage hikes, went on to voluntarily increase the pay, possibly out of concern for their brand image marketability. Consumer demand and standards of living are not similar across the United States. Data assessed from 29 states have high minimum wages shows that in some states employers have cut back on the number of low-wage employees, while in others there are no such consequences. Thus, a high minimum wage may be necessary in New York City but not in rural Mississippi. Cato also argued that there aren't sufficient studies to show that employment is positively impacted by raising the minimum wages. Companies also adjust to higher wage by increasing cost of their products and services, as well as making things more expensive. Thank you.